Okay, so good morning, everybody. We are continuing our review of chapter 4 in Tractate Megillah. We are holding 29b, 15 lines down from the wide lines. It starts Meisvei. They challenge. This is Rav's position, and if you're following in the article, it's 29b3 on the left column, the middle. So let me just remind everybody that we have two opinions. You have Rav and Shmuel as to what we read in Parsha Shkolim. One opinion is we read the Parsha from Pinchas, which is the same as the Rosh Chodesh, and the other is that we read from Parsha's Kisisa, which is the Parsha about Shkolim. And each one of these positions we are trying to challenge, alternating between one and the other. So now we're challenging Rav's position. Rav's position was that we read from Parshas Pinchas. So the Gemara challenged it from bringing a brisa. The brisa says that if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbos, then what we do is we read the portion of Shkolim, and then the Haftorah, we read the passage of Yayadakai, which also talks about the people giving Shkolim. So the Gemara says it makes sense, according to Shmuel's position, that we read in Parsha Shkolim and Parsha Kisisa, because we know this principle that any time the rabbis established a Haftorah, it would be similar to the Torah portion that you were reading that week. So if you were reading the Torah portion about Shkolim, so it makes sense to read about Yehoyada HaKohen and the Shkolim that they gave then. But with regards to you, Rav, who your opinion is that you read from Parshas Pinchas, how would you explain why the brisa that says the Haftarah should be Yada Kayin? But the Gemara answers is that similarly to the way we answered all the others with that were challenging Rav, by saying that we've already established that the whole purpose of the Shkolim was to bring the Karbanos, and so therefore, just like when a person would be reading from Parshas Pinchas, he would be remembering about the shkolim that he needs to pay to be able to pay for the new sacrifices. So they would immediately see the association and the connection with the Haftarah of Yoda HaKoyen, which also talks about shkolim. So now they challenge Rav's position once again, and they say that we have a brisa that tells us, right? The brisa tells us that if the day for Parsha Shkolim, which would be Rosh Chodesh Adar, if it fell out on a Shabbos, right? And that Shabbos would end up being close to Parsha Shkolim, whether before Parsha Shkolim or after it, which means to say either you have Shabbos Rosh Chodesh falling out in Parshas Tetzaveh, which is right before Kisisa, or in Parshas Vayakel, which is right after Kisisa. So what the brisa says is, so you read it, and then you repeat it. Now, I just mentioned that the brisa said the Shabbos, that if you were going to read Parsha Shkolim the Shabbos before or the Shabbos after, which means to say as follows. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in such a way that you're going to be reading Parsha Shkolim before Parsha Shkolim, the way it appears in the order of the Torah, or you'd read Parsha Shkolim a week after Parsha Shkolim falls out in the regular reading of the year, then we say you repeat it. You repeat Parsha Shkolim. Now, if you go according to Shmuel, who says that the Parsha of Shkolim is Parshas Kisisa, that makes very sense. The brisa is no problem. Why? Because it's as I explained it, that it's talking about Purim and Rosh Chodesh Adar falling around Parshas Kisisa, and that happens every year. Every year, Purim falls out somewhere around the Parsha of Kisisa. In other words, Parsha Shkolim falls out around Parsha Kisisa, either it be the Shabbos before or it's the Shabbos after. However, according to Rav, who says that Parsha Shkolim is Parsha Pinchas we only read in the summer weeks. If we only read it in the summer weeks, how are you going to make sense of this brisa that says that you're going to repeat it? What would happen? You'd have Parsha Shkolim falling out in the summer. That's not possible. Right? So how are you gonna make sense of it? And this seems to be a very strong question against Rav. However, the Gemara steps in and resolves it by saying that no, we can find an instance where this brisa would make sense, and that is if we follow the custom of the people in Eretz Yisrael, who they would not have a yearly cycle of reading the Torah, they would have a 3-year cycle of reading the Torah, in which case you could have an instance where Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Adar could fall out by Parshas Pinchas, in which case you would read it and then you would repeat it, which means to say you would read it 1 week after the other. Okay. Now, we're holding 29b4 if you're following in the Ascroll, and so the Gemara concludes by citing a brisa that supports Shmuel's view that we read Parshas Shkolim, as it says it says in a brisa that if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, then we read Kisisa, and we do the Haftarah from Yoda. Okay, so here it's not ambiguous. It doesn't say we read Parsha Shkolim. It says exactly what we read. We read Parsha Kisisa, which is the Parsha of Shkolim. Okay. Now,
Rabbi,
yes.
How can it happen even in a 3-year cycle that you will read the same parasha week after week?
No, what it means is that you could have an instance where you'd be reading Parshas Pinchas around the winter time, around the time of just before the spring, like the fall time, not the fall, excuse me, the springtime, just before Pesach, just before Purim. In other words, if you think about it, right, the solar calendar and the lunar calendar are off by 11 days, right?
Yeah.
So in order for us to be able to work out the Yom Tovim that they should fall out in the spring months and in the and so on, right? In the time of the harvesting, we have to sometimes add a month, right? Yes. So now that's how we organize that the Yom Tovim should fall out in the right time of the year. The Muslims, for example, they don't keep a solar calendar. They only keep the lunar calendar. So therefore, Ramadan ends up being any time of the year. It could be any time of the year. It keeps moving around, right? So likewise, if we would stick to a 1-year cycle of reading the portion, it would always work out that Parshas Kisisa is going to be around Rosh Chodesh Adar. You never have Parshas Pinchas being in the time of Rosh Chodesh Adar. However, if you read a 3-year cycle, then because it keeps moving around, right? Therefore, you could have an instance where you would have Parshas Pinchas fall out the Shabbos after Rosh Chodesh Adar, and according to Rav, who says you would read Parshas Pinchas as Parshas Shkolim, you'd have an instance where you read Parshas Pinchas 1 week for Parshas Shkolim, and then the following week would be the regular order of Parshas Pinchas for the regular cycle. That's what he's saying.
For the next cycle.
For that cycle. So that's how he worked it out. But nevertheless, we brought a brisa which establishes that we follow the view of Shmuel. It says that on when Rosh Chodesh Adar that falls out on Shabbos, we read from Kisisa, we read from the portion of the Shkalim of Kisisa, and then we do the Haftarah of Yoda, and that's how we actually do today. Okay, so now what happens when you have a situation that Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos? What would you do? So Rabbi Yitzchok says what you're going to do is as follows. You're going to take out 3 Sifrei Torah. One, you're going to read the portion of the day. The second, you're going to read for Rosh Chodesh. And the third, you're going to read Parshas Kisisa. And Rabbi Yitzchok also said that when Rosh Chodesh Tevis falls out on a Shabbos, you bring out 3 Sifrei Torah. Why? Also, for the same idea, you read the regular weekly portion, you're going to read the Rosh Chodesh portion, and then you're going to read the Chanukah portion. Frank the Gemara, why do you need to have Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka tell us both laws? I understand already from one with regards to the other. If you tell me that when you have 3 Torah readings, you need to take out 3 Sifrei Torah, so I already know from one to the other. It would be the same for Rosh Chodesh Tevis as it would be for for Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. Or if you just tell me about Rosh Chodesh Tevis, I already can understand that what you would do on Rosh Chodesh Tevis, on Rosh Chodesh Adar, is you would take out 3 Sefer Torah. The Gemara says, no, we need to have both laws, because if I'd only have one, I would I would assume wrongly what the review of Rabbi Yitzchok was. He says, because like follows. He says, if you were going to say, right, that if you're going to say, oh, and tell us only about Rabbi Yitzchok Nafka's view with regards to Rosh Chodesh Tevis, I would assume that maybe he doesn't hold like Shmuel, but rather he holds I would assume that he holds like Rav, because he would say as follows, that Rav Nafka's view is that on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, you would read from Parshas Rosh Chodesh. And since he doesn't say anything about taking out 3 Sifrei Torahs, I might assume that he only takes out 2 Sifrei Torah. Why? Because Parshas Shkolim and Parshas Rosh Chodesh are the same Parsha. So therefore, I come and tell you both cases to teach me that Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka holds like Shmuel, that Rosh Chodesh Adar, you don't read the Rosh Chodesh reading for Parshas Shkolim, but rather you read the Parshas Shkolim, and that's why you would have 3 different places in the Torah that you're reading from, and that's why you need to have 3 Sifrei Torah. And so the Gemara says, well, okay, that's fine. So then why don't you just tell me about Rosh Chodesh Adar, that you take out 3 Sifrei Torah, and then I already automatically can learn from there about Rosh Chodesh Tevis. So the Gemara says that the truth of the matter is that he didn't explicitly state about Rosh Chodesh Tevis. We just extrapolate from it that once he says that this is what we should do on Rosh Chodesh Adar, we're telling you that this is the same thing that we do for Rosh Chodesh Tevis, where you have Rosh Chodesh, you have Shabbos, and you have Chanukah. In that case, you'll have 3 separate readings. You take out 3 Sifrei Torah. Okay, there is one other time that we take out 3 Sifrei Torah. There's only 3 times a year that we do this. One time is, as we mentioned, Rosh Chodesh Adar, which is Parshas Shkolim. The second time is when we have Rosh Chodesh Tevis. So we have Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Chanukah. And the third time is coming up, Simchas Torah, when we take out 3 Sifrei Torah, because we're going to be reading from the end of the Zois HaBracha. And then we're going to have the reading of Bereshis, and then we're going to read the special reading for the Karbanos of the day, which is for Mafte, which we read from Parashat Pinchas. So those are the 3 times that we take out 3 Sifrei Torah during the year. It's a very special occasion when we do that, and it's very important to have in mind when you are praying for by Yehi ben Tzaya Oren, the prayer over there, Brich Shmei. It's a very auspicious moment when you're taking out 3 Sifrei Torah to ask for whatever it is it mentions over there in the prayer. Okay, moving on. Says the Gemara, we've learned, right, that Rosh Chodesh Tevis that fell out in the middle of the week, right? Now, how do we combine the Torah reading for Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah? So Yitzchok says you read 3 on Rosh Chodesh and 1 from Chanukah. Yimi of Haifa says no, you read 3 from Chanukah and 1 for Rosh Chodesh. So the Gemara says like this: Ramani says that Yitzchok Nafka's view, right, makes more sense. Why? Because we have a principle that something that comes more often and something that comes less often. So the precedence is given to the one that comes more often. So what comes more often? Obviously, Rosh Chodesh comes more often than Chanukah. So therefore, the first ones should be given. The first aliyah should be for Rosh Chodesh, and then only the last one should be Chanukah. But Rav Avin says that it makes more sense to go according to Rav Dimi. Why? Because if we would only be reading the Torah because it's Chanukah, right, we'd only be calling up 3 aliyahs. Who's the one that causes that you're going to read 4 aliyahs and not 3? Rosh Chodesh. So let Rosh Chodesh come along and be the one that we read the fourth portion. So let Chanukah come first, and then Rosh Chodesh would be the 4th guy being called up to read that. since it's resolved, right? So later on, they asked Rav Yosef, what's the halacha? So Rav Yosef says that we do not concern ourselves with Rosh Chodesh, meaning the primary reading is that of Hanukkah, and that should come first, and be more substantial than that of Rosh Chodesh. Rabbah says that no. Rabbah said that we don't concern ourselves with Hanukkah, but the primary reading should be of Rosh Chodesh, right? But what's the bottom line halacha, says the Gemara? The halacha is that we do not concern ourselves with Hanukkah, and Rosh Chodesh is the primary reading, and then afterwards you will read the reading for Hanukkah. Okay, so now in other words, you take out two Sefer Torah, and you'll read first the portion of Rosh Chodesh, and then you'll read about Hanukkah. Okay. From the second Sefer Torah. Now, we've learned like this: if the time for reading Shkolim fell out in Parshas Tetzaveh, so let me just share my screen over here for a minute so you can understand what we're about to say. Okay, so this is Tetzaveh followed by Kisisa. Okay, you see it? Tetzaveh followed by Kisisa. So the question is, at what point do we read Parshas Kisisa as Shkolim, right? So he says like this. In other words, how should we divide the aliyahs? How do we call up people? We only have 7 aliyahs, right? So what do we do? So Rabbi Yitzchok Nafka says what you do is you call up 6 and you finish the whole Parshas Tetzaveh within 6 readings, which means, for example, you call up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the 6th guy, instead of stopping by the 7th aliyah, just keeps going and ends off over here till Kodesh Kodoshim Hu Lashem, which is the end of Parshas Tetzaveh, right? And then the guy who's going to be called up from Parshas Shkolim will start reading from Vayidaber Hashem El Moshe Lema of Kisisa until Lechaper Al Nafshei Seichem, which the Gemara refers to over here as till Vasisa Kiyar, which means the next section. So he says that's how you'll do it. You'll call up 6 people to read from Parshas Tetzaveh and 1 guy to read the first paragraph over here of Kisisa for Parshas Shkolim. To which Abaya, to which Abaya comes along and says that that is not such a good idea. Why? Because what people are going to assume is that what you've done is you just run a stop sign, which means to say, you're not reading a special portion for Parshas Kisisa, you just are reading the end of Parshas Tetzaveh, because people are following along in a scroll, right? And as they're reading in the scroll, right, they're just continuing on the verses, thinking that the Parsha just ends later on. They'll have no clue that what you're doing is you're reading a special portion for Parshas Shkolim. So Abai says what you should do is you should read from Va'ata Tetzaveh. Let me share my screen again. Okay, you should read from Va'ata Tetzaveh, and instead of ending over here by Kodesh Kadoshim Hu Lashem, keep going. Just keep going. Keep reading all the way through till Lechaper Al Nafshei Seichem. Right. End of reading that Parshas Tetzaveh and the first portion of Kisisa, and then once the 6th person has finished reading this portion of Kisisa as well, right? Then you go back and repeat Kisisa. Why? Because then people are going to ask, right? Why are we repeating? And people will tell him it's Parshas Shkolim. That's why we're repeating it, right? And then we'll have a clear distinction to tell us that what we're reading now is in honor of Parshas Kisisa. So that's how Abaya suggests we should do it. So now, that's how Abaya suggests we should do it. So now let's examine this in light of the following brisa. It says in a brisa, right, that says that if Parshas Shkolim fell on the Shabbat, right, who in the week that the Torah reading was close to the portion of Shkolim, which means like Parshas Tetzaveh or Parshas Vayakel, whether it's before or after, they would read Shkolim and then they would repeat it. They would read it, and then they would repeat it. Now, with regards to Abaya's view, how Abaya now says we should act on a Shabbos, where we're reading Parshas Tetzaveh, and it's Shabbos Shkolim, then it would make sense. Why? Because here you have, right? Here you have a situation where you are actually repeating Parshas Kisisa. He says you read all the way to the end of Tetzaveh, including the first portion of Kisisa, and then you go back and repeat it, as you can see over here, right? You keep on going all the way till the Chapa Nafshe Seichem, and then you repeat it. But according to Rabbi Yitzchok Nafka, there's no repetition going on, because what you told us to do is finish off at the end of Parshas Tetzaveh, and then what you should do is just just say the beginning of Parshas Kisisa as the seventh Aliyah, and that's good enough. So according to this, how are you going to fit with the brisa that says that what we should do in such a situation is to repeat it? So with regards to this, Rabbi Yitzchok Nafka shows that the understanding of this brisa is not as we just presented it. When we say that you go back and repeat it, we're not referring to repeating it in the very same Shabbos. What we're saying is that if Parshas Tetzaveh is Parshas Shkolim, and you end up reading Parshas Tetzaveh and the extra portion of Parshas Kisisa, so what should you do the following Shabbos? Not the same Shabbos. The following Shabbos, what should you do? You should just repeat it. How do I know this? Because if you're not interpreting the brisa in that manner, then Abaya is going to have the same problem. Why? Because what's Abaya going to say with the fact that the brisa says that this rule applies whether it's the Shabbos before or the Shabbos after? Clearly, if Shabbos Shkolim were to fall out in Parshas Vayakel, right, there'd be no, according to Abaya, there'd be no reason to read the whole Parshas Vayakel, then read the beginning of Parshas Kisisa, and then read the beginning of Parshas Kisisa again. Nobody would do that. The only time he says to do something like that, to read the whole Parsha and include the beginning of Parshas Kisisa, is when Parshas Kisisa falls out, when Parshas Shkolim falls out the Shabbos before Kisisa, which means it'd be Parshas Tetzaveh, right? Only then it would make sense. So therefore, since that cannot be the pshat of the brisa, right? Since that cannot be the pshat of the brisa, therefore I would say to you as follows: that what it's saying is that whether it's Parshas Tetzaveh or whether it's Parshas Vayakel, right? Nevertheless, right, what you're going to do is you're going to end up reading Parshas Kisisa twice, once for Shabbos Shkolim and once for Parshas Kisisa, or once for Parshas Shkolim, once for Parshas Kisisa, and then the following week you're going to repeat it again, because that's going to be the week of Shabbos Shkolim. That's what it means to repeat it. So that's how he explains the brisa and how it doesn't serve as a challenge to his position. So now, what happens if Parshas Shkolim falls out in Parshas Kisisa itself? What should you do then? Right? Again, if Parshas Kisisa, I'm going to share the screen again. I don't know why I closed it. I should just keep it open. Okay. If Parshas Kisisa is Parshas Shkolim, what am I going to do to make people understand, right, that what we're doing now is for Parshas Shkolim and not just Parshas Kisisa? So Rabbi Yitzchok says what you should do is you should call up 6 people, not from the beginning of the Parsha. What you should do is call up 6 people starting from verse 17. That's what you should do. Call up 6 people to finish the whole Parsha. And then after you finish the whole Parsha, then you call a guy up for the last Aliyah. And where you're going to read from the beginning of the Parsha, which is the Parsha of Shkolim. People are going to wonder, why are we doing it out of order? We should be doing it in order, and then they'll find out that it's Parsha Shkolim. That's the way we'll make a distinction. So to this, Abaya says, no, that's going to be a terrible idea, because people will not realize that what you're doing is, especially for Parsha Shkolim, what they're going to be thinking is you just read it out of order. You made a mistake and you started from verse 17 and started instead of starting from verse 11, right? And so what you're doing now is you're going back and filling in what you missed out, and thereby fulfilling your obligation, right? And so therefore, what you should do is, according to Abaya, is you should read the whole Parsha of Parsha Kisisa, and then go back and read the first section of Parsha Kisisa. In other words, read it all in order, and then read it again. People will ask, why are you reading it again? They won't think that you missed it, because they've already heard you say it the first time, right? And so therefore, they'll realize that we're doing something special, and it's for Parsha Shkolim. And in fact, indeed, we have a brisa that says, according to Abaya's view, that when Parsha Shkolim falls out in Parsha Kisisa itself, you read it and then you repeat it. In other words, you read the whole Parsha and then you go back and you repeat it again, the beginning of the Parsha for the final Aliyah. Okay, that is the end of this section. Now, moving on to the next section, right? We're gonna need some charts for this, and we'll get. I'm gonna bring in the charts soon. Okay, so it says like this. In the Mishnah, it says that Rosh Chodesh, when it fell out during the week, right? If Rosh Chodesh falls out in the middle of the week, then the portion of Shkolim is advanced to the previous Shabbos, which means the last Shabbos of Shvat, which would usually be Parshas Mishpatim. So the end of Mishpatim, right? You'd call a guy up and you'd give him, and you'd read Parshas Shkolim in that Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so let's examine this a little bit closer. So it was said as follows. He says like this: if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Friday, what happens if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Friday? When do we read Parshas Shkolim? So, what's the real question? The real question is, right? In other words, this is what we're going to end up seeing, which is, how much time do you need? And no, there's a few issues. You know what? I'm not gonna get into it yet. Let's first state the rules, the different views, and then yes, yeah.
Why is it that this is the first time that I see that they say Betoch Shabbat, meaning Yom Chol? Why don't they just say Yom Chol?
Well, you'll see that there are two opinions as to how to understand the word Betoch Shabbos, right? One way to understand it means in the middle of the week, and that's the way we explain the Mishnah. Another way, as the Gemara is going to soon show us, is that another way to interpret it is that Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos itself, right? And you'll see there's two views, two opinions as to how we're going to interpret it.
They're really trying to confuse us.
Yeah. That's they say with regards to, what is it, economics or something, that if you understand, then you're not paying attention. If you're not confused, you're not paying attention, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that over here, right? With regards to the Gemara, if you're not confused, then you're not paying attention. Okay, so this is like this. So they learned in the academies as follows: Rosh Chodesh Adar that fell on Friday, right? So when do we reach Parshas Shkolim? According to Rav, we read it the Shabbos before. According to Shmuel, no, we can postpone it and read it the very next day. Okay, that's the two opinions. Okay, you understand? Again, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Friday, do we go back, or do we read it on the day after on Shabbos? Rav says we go back. Shmuel says we read it on Shabbos, meaning the Shabbos the day after, meaning on base Adar. Okay, so let's explain both opinions. According to Rav says the reason why we read it is so that the second day of so that if the reading is deferred on to the second day of Adar, then what's going to happen is there's going to be less than 2 weeks before the money changers end up being in the province, and therefore, because it's not going to be 2 weeks, therefore we should rather read it earlier. If you remember before, we said that there was a machlekes between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon Gamliel. One, what the Chachamim said, you need to read the laws of the Yom of the festival that's coming 30 days before. Rav Shimon Gamliel's view was that no, 2 weeks is enough. So now, following the more stringent view that you need to have 2 weeks. Excuse me. Let me go back. Following the lenient view, the view of Rav Shimon Gamliel that you only need 2 weeks, but at least 2 weeks, right? So according to Rav, if you're going to read Hashish Shkolim the day after Rosh Chodesh, right? So what does that mean? That means you don't even have 2 weeks until the money changers come. That's why he says, bring it earlier, read it the Shabbos before, so you'll have just over 2 weeks, right, before the money changers show up. And this will give people time to get their money together and go out and give their contributions for the karbanos. According to Shmuel, he says the reason why we can postpone the reading to the day after, even though it's going to be base, and you know, what do we do with the fact that there's not 14 days? What do we do with the fact that there's not 2 weeks? He says, listen, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Friday, then the 15th is also going to be on Friday. And the money changers are not going to venture out on Erev Shabbos to go and start this whole affair of changing money. So they're going to wait till Sunday anyway. So therefore, it's not going to be the 15th. It's going to be after the 15th, and then you'll have your 2 weeks anyway. And therefore, you can postpone it. So that's why we have these two views, Rav and Shmuel, saying whether you bring the reading of Shkolim earlier or you can make it a day later. Okay? Okay. Now, one second. So another point here is that according to Shmuel, right, it would be better to read Parsha Shkolim on the second day of Adar, and this way, right, and this way you're not going to cause an unnecessary interruption between the reading of Shkolim and Zachar. So now, to examine this dispute between Rav and Shmuel, right, we're going to look at another Mishnah. It says, we looked in our Mishnah, right? It says that if Rosh Chodesh fell within the week, right, what we do is we advance Shabbos Shkolim to the past week, and then we interrupt the reading of the 4 parshas on the following Shabbos, right? So now, does this mean that so we're asking, right, when our Mishnah says that when Rosh Chodesh falls during the week, you go back a Shabbos, right? And then you interrupt the reading of the 4 parshas on the following Shabbos. Is that true only when it falls, let's say, on Wednesday? Or does that also apply on if Rosh Chodesh falls on Friday? As you will see what the question is. So like this. If you were to say that what our Mishnah is saying is that any day of the week, if Rosh Chodesh is not on Shabbos, so long as Rosh Chodesh is not on Shabbos, you always go back, and then you interrupt the Shabbos after. In other words, interrupt between the 4 weeks. It's time for the chart. It's time for the chart. 1 second. Okay. Let's go. 1 second. We want, okay. 1 second. Let's find the right one. 1 second. Okay. Let me put these ones down so you don't see them. And let me put this one down. 1 second. Okay, let me just share again. Okay, here goes. Okay, you see this? Okay, do you see the luach? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Look at this luach. You've got Rosh Chodesh falling out on Friday. Okay? So now, if I'm going to come along and say that the Mishnah, which says that if Rosh Chodesh falls out in the middle of the week, then I bring Shkolim a week earlier. So then what that would mean is I always go back to Parsha Shkolim, no matter whether Rosh Chodesh falls out on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so long as it's during the week, I'm always going to do Shabbos Shkolim before, and then what happens is, this Shabbos, right after, is going to be an interruption between the first of the 4 readings and the second of the 4 readings. Okay? That's always good. That's Rav's opinion. That's Rav's opinion. Okay? Shmuel is of the opinion that if it falls out during the middle of the week, then you do exactly as it says over here. But if it falls out on Friday, right, then take Pasha Shkolim, and instead of being at the Shabbos before, pull that down to the second day of Adar and read it then. Okay? So that's our question. The question is, right? The question is Ben's question. What's Ben's question? What does B'toch HaShabbat mean? B'toch HaShabbat, does that mean including Friday? Meaning in the middle of the week, even if it's in the middle, even if it's on Friday? Or maybe B'toch HaShabbat does not mean in the middle of the week. Maybe B'toch HaShabbat means on Shabbat itself. Oh, if it falls out on Shabbat itself, then that's something very different, right? So that's what we're trying to establish. So let's see what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says like this: let's not read B'toch HaShabbat as meaning in the middle of the week, but rather read it as B'toch HaShabbat, in Shabbat itself, on Shabbat itself. So therefore, if Shabbos falls out on Rosh Chodesh, right, then if Shabbos falls out on Rosh Chodesh, then, one second, if Rosh Chodesh I have a bit of a problem with this, because what is Shmuel saying? Is Shmuel saying, are we trying to say that according to Shmuel, the way we would understand this Mishnah is that if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, then we say Shkolim the Shabbos before, but that's not the case. So I'm a bit stuck. Don't we say that when Shabbos falls out on Rosh Chodesh, we actually read Pasha Shkolim on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh? So I'm not sure. But what the Gemara before. No. What the Gemara is certainly saying over here is that if Rosh Chodesh, that B'seich Shabbos means if it fell out on Shabbos. However, if Rosh Chodesh fell out on Friday, then the reading is not advanced to the week before, but it's read the day after. So in order to try and attempt to resolve the question, right, we're going to bring a brisa. What does the brisa say? The brisa says which is the first week of the 4 readings, right? Let me pull up something over here. One second. Let me use one of my charts. Let's say Shabbat. Okay, let's do this. Okay, let's say you've got Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Okay, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. So the first Shabbos is Shabbos Shkolim. The second Shabbos is Shabbos Zachar. The third Shabbos you skip a week. The fourth Shabbos is Pashas Para, and the fifth Shabbos is Shabbos HaChodesh. Okay. Yeah, you see that? That's how you do the 4 weeks. If Shabbos falls out on Rosh Chodesh. Again, Shabbos Shkolim, followed by Shabbos Zachar, which is right before Purim, right? And then you skip a week, and then you've got Pashas Para and Pashas HaChodesh. Okay? So now let's see what the Gemara says. He says, what's the first Shabbos? So he says, anytime that Rosh Chodesh Adar falls within the week of Shabbos, and even if it's on Friday, right? Then that would be the first of the readings. Okay, so this is not the right chart for This is not the right chart for what the Gemara is saying right now. Let's just take let's take a Friday. Okay, let's take a Friday. 1 second. And let's just share this. 1 second. Okay. So let's say Rosh Chodesh, right? Let's say Rosh Chodesh is on Friday. So what we're going to do is the first of the Torah readings is going to be the Shabbos before, okay? And then we skip a week, right? And then you've got Parshas Zachar, then you skip a week, then you got Parshas Parah, and then you got Parshas Chodesh. But the bottom line is, according to this Brisa, right? The Brisa explicitly says that when Rosh Chodesh falls out within the week, even if it falls on Friday, when do we read the first portion? We read the first portion, the Shabbos before, and that would be in accordance with Rav, right? So now the Gemara wants to try and explain the Brisa to resolve the dispute. Let us say that the Brisa is saying that even on Erev Shabbos, right, it's considered to still be within the week, and just like if on Wednesday you'd go back to the Shabbos prior in order to be able to read 2 weeks before, so too on Friday, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Friday, we'd still go back to the previous Shabbos to read the first of the 4 readings, which is Parshas Shkolim. To which Shmuel will answer and say, no, you're not reading the Brisa correctly. The Brisa, when it says that what is the first Shabbos, it's any time that Rosh Chodesh Adar falls in it, not in the week. In it meaning on Shabbos. Then that would make total sense. So the way he's interpreting the Brisa, is that the Brisa is talking about this scenario, the one I'm about to share with you on the screen. He says, what does it mean? B'soicha, it's when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos. That's when Shabbos Shkolim is going to be the first Shabbos, right? It's going to be when it's on Rosh Chodesh itself, but not if it falls out on Friday. If it falls out on Friday, then we would read Shabbos Shkolim the following, the day after.
The previous.
Huh?
The previous.
That's the way. So basically, the way we're explaining the dispute between Rav and Shmuel is, how do we interpret the word B'soich or B'soicha? So Rav would interpret B'soich as, or the way we would interpret it for Rav, is that B'soich B'soicha would mean in the same week, including Erev Shabbos, right? Shmuel would interpret B'soich or B'soicha meaning only if it actually fell out on Shabbos. Otherwise, if it fell out on Friday, then you could read it not the Shabbos before, but the Shabbos, you could read it the next day, the Shabbos after. So the Gemara basically concludes and says that this actually corresponds to a dispute between the Tanoim, where it says in the Brisa that we alternate the Shabbos of the first 2 of the 4th Shabbos portions, so that a Shabbos on which no portion is read intervenes between Shabbos Shkolim and Shabbos Zachar. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that we do not alternate. Rather, the portions of Shkolim are read on consecutive Shabbos. Okay, so now Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, when do I say that we do not alternate? When Rosh Chodesh falls on Friday, but when Rosh Chodesh falls out during the week, then we read it to the Shabbos before, even though it's still in the month of Shvat. So the dispute between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda revolves around Rosh Chodesh that falls on a Friday, and it appears that Shmuel adopts Rabbi Shimon's position, and he says, in order not to interrupt between the different readings, therefore, what you'll do is you will read Parshas Shkolim, and then the day after, meaning on the second day of Adar, so that the very next Shabbos you will be reading Parshas Zachar. This way, you have no interruption between the first of the 4 portions and the second of the 4 portions. Let me just show you what I mean. Let me see if I can find it. Friday, where is it? Oh, let's close it. 1 second. Yeah, let me. Sorry, Friday. So according to Shmuel, 1 second. According to Shmuel, he's saying like this. You see over here, if I go according to Rav, I'm going to be skipping a week between Shkalim and Zachar. So therefore, he says when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Friday, Shmuel's of the opinion, don't skip a week. His opinion is, this is the week that you should have Pasha Shkalim, and because I want to follow the position of Reb Shimon, right? And have Pasha Zachar and Pasha Shkalim 1 week after the other, one after the other. And that's how we explain the machlekes, that each one has a different Tana who they follow, in terms of why they say whether to bring it a week earlier or read it the day after. Okay, so now, so far so good?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it seems that under the current situation, that the only way you could have 2 skipped weeks is if Rosh Chodesh fell out on Friday, correct?
If Rosh Chodesh falls out on Friday, no, 1 second. Let me just check this.
I mean, we saw that on the chart, but it would seem that that's the only scenario that you could have 2 skipped weeks. If
Yes,
Rosh Chodesh fell out on
that's
Friday,
correct.
right?
Correct, but that would be following Rav's opinion, not Shmuel's opinion. That's correct.
Not Shmuel's. Yeah.
Because according here, so let me just share this for a second. Yeah, so here you've got Rosh Chodesh falls out on Friday, okay, and you've got Parsha Shkolim the Shabbos before. Skip 1 week, then you've got Parsha Zachar. Skip 1 week, then you got Parsha Parah, and then you have Parsha Zachodesh. So yeah, so that's how you would have 2 skipped weeks in the month. Okay. All right. Now, the Gemara states like this, right? On the second Shabbos, we read the portion of Zachar. So it was said, it was taught in the academy, that when Purim falls out on a Friday, right? So then, when do you read Parsha Zachar? Again, a machlekes between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says you read it the Shabbos before, and why is that? Well, we'll see in a minute. And Shmuel says we postpone it. We read it. In other words, just like we said, that if Rosh Chodesh falls out on a Friday, according to Shmuel, you'd read Parsha Shkolim the day after. So too, with regards to Zachar, there's a machlekes. Rav says we read it the Shabbos before. We want to precede Purim with the reading of Parsha Zachar, whereas Shmuel says no, it's fine to read Parsha Zachar the day after Purim on the 15th. So what's the reasoning behind the two? According to Rav, it's no good to read it after because you want to always have observing the observance of Purim after the commemoration. If you're going to read it, you're going to have the commemoration after the reading. And in the Megillah, what does it say? And these days, Niskarim are remembered, Manasim, and then they are observed. So therefore, you want to have the remembrance, the commemoration before the observance. So therefore, according to Rav, you've got to bring Parshas Zachar a week earlier, right? The Shabbos before. According to Shmuel, he says it's fine. I've got no problem reading it the day after because I'm going to rely on the fact that in Yerushalayim, they're still celebrating Purim on the 15th. If that's the case, you'd have the commemoration and the observance coming together. And so therefore, I'm not concerned with this idea of having the observance prior to the commemoration because it's not really prior, because in Yerushalayim, they're going to be doing both together, and that is fine. So in order to resolve this, right, we look at our Mishnah and we say that in our Mishnah it says that on the second Shabbos we read Parsha Zachar. Now, when Rosh Chodesh fall occurs on Shabbos, as in the case described at the beginning of the Mishnah, so then Purim occurs on Friday. And what does it say over there? It says that in the second Shabbos, right, in the second Shabbos, you're going to read Parsha Zachar, which would be the 8th day of the month. And that fits with Rav's opinion. Now, in order to defend Shmuel's opinion, he says, no, what does the second week mean? What does it mean, the second Shabbos? It means the second Shabbos counting from the interruption, which means to say, let's pull this back up over here, 1 second. Let's find it. Friday. No, where's Friday? Here you go. So what he's saying is that this is according to Rav, this calendar. Let's try and read it according to Shmuel, right? He holds that the first Shabbos is what? It's going to be Parshas Shkolim, right? So you got Friday, followed by Parshas Shkolim on the second day of the month, and then instead of Parshas Zachar, that's going to be the week that we skip, right? And then the next week would be Parshas Zachar. So what does the Mishnah mean? This in the second week. The second week means the week after the Hafsaka, the week after the interruption, because 9 is not going to be Zachar as it says over here, but rather 9 is going to be the week that we skip a week, because according to Shmuel, right, the second day of the month is when we're going to read Parshas Shkolim, then we're going to skip, and then the second week of the skip, meaning the week after the skip, that's when we read Parshas Zachar, and that's how he would interpret our Mishnah. Okay, so that's how he wants to try and so that's how Rav Papa defends Shmuel. Yes.
So the skip, you still read the Torah, but you don't read Zachar.
That's correct. You
in other words, skip is only between those two.
That's correct.
Between Shkalim and Zachor, that's all.
That according to Shmuel, that's what
every time they say skip, they mean that space between those two parshas.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
So in order to try and resolve this, right, in order to resolve this, we're going to bring a proof from a brisa. What does the brisa say? The brisa says, which is the second week for the reading of the 4 portions, any Shabbos within which Purim falls. And then he goes on to say, even if Purim falls out on Friday, and that fits with what? With the view of Rav. So what's Shmuel going to say? Right? So therefore, so just like if the rest of the week you're going to bring, just like if Purim fell out in the middle of the week, like on a Wednesday, you'd bring it forward. In other words, you'd read Parshas Zachar the Shabbos prior, right? Even according to Shmuel, you read it the Shabbos prior, because according to Shmuel, there's no Yerushalayim to rely on in such a case. Because if Purim falls on a Wednesday, then in Yerushalayim it's going to be the Purim is going to be on a Thursday. So nobody would be having the observance together with the commemoration. So even Shmuel would say that you bring it forward. So why not say that when it says over there in the Brisa that just like if Purim falls in the middle of the week, you bring it early, so too is if Purim falls out on a Friday, right? The Brisa is saying that if it falls out on a Friday, you also bring it earlier. To which Shmuel says the same answer as before, you're misunderstanding the Brisa. When it says ba, it means when Purim falls out on a Shabbos, then I would say that you bring it you bring it the Shabbos, or you bring it in the Shabbos before. In other words, you say the Shabbos before, and so too. But excuse me. When any Shabbos on which Purim falls, and also even if it falls on a Shabbos, then what? Then the second Shabbos for reading Parshas Zachar is the one upon which Purim occurs, and that's the way the academies of Shmuel, the Yeshiva and Shmuel, read the Brisa, that it says ba, not Pesachah, but ba on the Shabbos. Okay, so now the time for reading Zachar is when Purim falls on Shabbos itself. When do we read Zachar? According to Rav Huna, everybody says you don't advance the reading to the preceding Shabbos, but rather you read it on Shabbos itself. Now, Rav Nachman says that it's still a matter of a dispute. Rav maintains that Zachar is read the preceding Shabbos, even in this case. And the Gemara brings a statement from Rav that supports Rav Nachman's view that it's not so simple to say that everybody says you read it on the Shabbos of Purim, right? Because Reb Chia says, Reb Chia Abba said in the name of Reb Abba, in the name of Rav, that Purim that falls out on Shabbos, we read Parshas Zochar on the preceding Shabbos. Okay. Everybody still good? You still following? Okay. Moving on to the next of the four portions. What happens with Parshas Parah? On the third Shabbos, we read the portion of the Parsha of Parah Aduma. So the Gemara says, when do we read Parshas Parah Aduma? So he says, we bring a brisa up, which is the third week. It says, any week that is close to Purim, right? That's the week that you read Parshas Parah, which means to say, if Purim falls out on a Sunday, following Shabbos is Parshas Parah, no matter what. It's always right after Purim. So the Gemara says, is that so simple? Is that so simple? And let me pull up any of them. Let's take okay. So here you've got Purim on Friday, and what you're saying is that on the 15th, right, you read Parshas Parah. Is that the case? Or let me you see this one over here, right? If it falls out on a Friday, so you're telling me that okay, so in that case, right, same thing. You're telling me that if Purim falls out on a Thursday, right, then you're going to read Parah on the 16th. Is that so simple? So let's see what the Gemara says. Itma was taught in the academies that what the Reb Chama bar Chanina said that the time for the reading of Parshas Parah is the Shabbos that is close to but preceding Rosh Chodesh Nisan. This is one Shabbos later than what we had said in the Brisa. So seemingly it's a contradiction. Here's the thing. Let me show you on the screen. Okay, look. Here's Rosh Chodesh. At the bottom of the page is Rosh Chodesh. 30th. The 30th is Rosh Chodesh. Yes? If the 30th is Rosh Chodesh, then what I'm going to say is the Shabbos closest to that is the 23rd. Right? If that's the case, then what I'm really saying is that in an instance where Purim falls out on a Thursday, right? 14th is a Thursday, you're not going to do what the Brisa says, which is to read Parshas Parah on the 16th. Rather, you're going to skip a week. And what are you going to do? You're going to read Parshas Parah the following week. Why? Because we're going to follow what Reb Chama bar Chanina said, that we're going to read Parshas Zochar, the Shabbos closest to Rosh Chodesh, right? So the Gemara answers that there's no contradiction. There's no contradiction between the Brisa and this teaching. Why? He says because the ruling of Reb Chama only applies in the situation that I just showed you, where Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out on Shabbos. But if Rosh Chodesh falls out in the middle of the week, then if Rosh Chodesh, the ruling of Chama applies only when Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos. And the ruling of the Brisa that we just mentioned, that the Brisa says that you always read it closer to Parshas Zochar, is, for example, when Rosh Chodesh does not fall out on Shabbos. So, no, sorry, that's the one that it does fall out on Shabbos. Yes, 1 second. Just 1 second. I just want to share a different screen. Let me find. Oh, man. Okay, so here, for example, let me just look at this, and then I'm going to answer your question. So in this case, right, our Brisa would be talking about when Rosh Chodesh falls out over here on a Tuesday, in which case Parshas HaChodesh would be the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, and Parshas Parah would be right after in the week of Purim, because Purim would be on a Sunday, and then in that week we'd read Parshas Parah. So therefore, it's not a contradiction. The only time Reb Chama's teaching applies is when Rosh Chodesh falls out on a Shabbos. Yes, Ben.
I don't understand. On the previous page, you showed that Rosh Chodesh falls on the 30th of the month.
Okay.
How can Rosh Chodesh be on the last day of a month? It's always on the first day of the month, isn't it?
Right. So the way things work is that if you'll notice, sometimes we have 1 day Rosh Chodesh, and sometimes we'll have 2 days Rosh Chodesh. Why do we have sometimes 1 day Rosh Chodesh and sometimes 2 days Rosh Chodesh? Because it all depends on how many days there are in the previous month. If there are 29 days in the previous month, then the 30th day is not really the 30th day of the previous month. It's really the Rosh Chodesh of the next month, right? And so therefore, what would happen is we'd have 2 days Rosh Chodesh. Why is this? This is because as follows.
But you didn't show 2 days Rosh Chodesh. You showed the 30th to be Rosh Chodesh, and then you went to something else on the next day.
Because my luach only showed 1 month. It didn't show the next month, but it's really Rosh Chodesh, right?
Oh, okay.
And the reason for this is as follows. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the way they would sanctify the new month is based on the sighting of the moon, which means to say that some months have 29 days before the birth of the new moon, and some days have 30 days until the birth of the new moon. The problem is, what happens if it was a month that only has 29 days, and the first day of the new month is supposed to be sanctified as the first day of the new month, right? But nobody was able to see the moon for whatever reason. It was cloudy or whatever it is. They weren't able to see the moon. So no witnesses would show up in Beis Din. If no witnesses would show up in Beis Din, so then that day wouldn't be Rosh Chodesh, right? Only the next day would be Rosh Chodesh, and that would be the first day of the month. And since that's the case, right? Since that's the case, today when we don't, since today we don't have a Beis Din that establishes the month, what we do is we celebrate 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. We celebrate the 30th day as Rosh Chodesh, because we know that the previous month should only really have
29 days.
29 days. No, that's not correct. That is not correct. That's not correct. In a month where we know for sure that it should only have 29 days, then we only celebrate 1 day Rosh Chodesh. In a day that we have, we know that the month should have 30 days, then we celebrate 2 days Rosh Chodesh. Okay, that's when we celebrate 2 days Rosh Chodesh. All right, we'll stop over here, and in Yitzchok Hashem, we'll pick up from here tomorrow. And I'm not sure we're going to be able to finish the Masechta as I had hoped, although it's not such a long page tomorrow, but we shall see how we go. And I wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.